Hello, my name is Bobby Zirkin and I am a former state senator from Baltimore County. I'm here with the Maryland State Bar Association, where we advocate on behalf of thousands of legal professionals across the state from many different practice areas and demographics. Over the last year, we have connected with over 20 candidates for the offices of Governor, Lieutenant Governor, Attorney General, and Comptroller for nonpartisan interviews and debates. Through these conversations, the MSBA has provided an opportunity for its members and the public to hear about pressing issues facing the legal profession in the state. Today, we welcome Republican candidate for Lieutenant Governor Gordana Schifanelli for a candidate conversation. Ms. Schifanelli is running on a ticket with Delegate Dan Cox. She is an attorney and an MSBA member. She joined us in June of this year for an interview, and we look forward to speaking to her again today, ahead of the general election in November. To see all of our interviews with candidates, please visit msba.org/connectwiththecandidates. Ms. Schifanelli, welcome, and it's nice to see you again.
It's so good to be back.
All right, well, we have limited time, so let's get into it. We're going to talk, hopefully, about lots of different issues today, so it's great to see you and do another interview with you. First of all, just a quick question, how's it going on the campaign trail?
It is something that I never thought I would experience. We have a lot of people, a lot of parents, grandparents, retirees coming to our events and telling us what they want us to do. I mean, this is literally, I've never experienced grassroots movement in the way that I have experienced. Maybe that's normal. I don't know. You know better than I do. But for me, this is the first time rodeo, and I am very, very humbled by all these people that are literally giving me their soul and their private, intimate issues that I never thought I would ever hear.
Okay.
So, yeah, it's really good.
And you're enjoying the experience?
I am.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let's get into it. You live on the Eastern Shore, correct?
Yes, I live on Kent Island, Stevensville.
In Kent Island. So I'm going to start with something that's obviously quite important to the Eastern Shore. We're going to try to get through lots of issues in our time here together, and that's the environment. It's something we didn't have an opportunity to talk at all about last time. Obviously, there's a range of issues. You live in an area where the Chesapeake Bay is important to the environment, but also to the economics of the Eastern Shore and the state. So I guess just an open-ended question. If you were elected Lieutenant Governor, what would be your kind of top one, top two, top three priorities for protecting the environment, for any environmental issues in Maryland?
I mean, this is a great question. Number one is continue Governor Hogan's clean up the bay. I mean, you know what? I literally watched the bay and the ships going through the bay and the development and the dredging and destruction of oyster beds. I think we need to be able to continue on with Governor Hogan's Clean the Bay initiative. I mean, he started it. We're still 50% to the goal that Governor Hogan had started with or had intended to complete. The runoffs, the acidicity of the water, it's a big issue. I would love to have back the sports fishery back. I mean, there's so many different types of fish that no longer exist in a Chesapeake Bay. They moved down to South Carolina and North Carolina. So kayaking, sports fishery, I mean, all kind of type of tourism that people from New Jersey and New York, and I see a lot of license plates of that nature on Kent Island, need. So I think cleaning the bay is number one priority, and it's going to be continued to, we're going to talk to Pennsylvania to see what's happening with the Pennsylvania's runoffs, Delaware runoffs, and to make sure that our waters are cleaner and people can actually swim safely in the bay. Flesh-eating bacteria has increased in the last 4 or 5 years significantly. That is something that's very dangerous, and we just can't sustain living on the water when it's so poisonous and toxic. So I think that's my first and number one thought. You know, we didn't prepare. I didn't have the questions.
Sure, of course.
When you just asked me that, I love kayaking. I'm a big kayaker, and getting hit with jellyfish all the time is no fun. And it's a disaster. It's dirty, it's disgusting, it's oil spills all over the water that needs to be cleaned up. And I'm a big environmental advocate, and I would love to clean that bay for everybody's sake.
Okay, so the continuation of the Hogan initiative. Is there
That's
anything,
right.
The legislature, as I'm sure you know, did a great deal on climate change type legislation. Obviously, Maryland's not going to, on its own affect climate change, but Any thoughts about like what Senator Pinsky, Delegate Barvey, and the others did on it was kind of one of the biggest pieces of legislation from the last legislative session. Things they got right, things they got wrong, things to improve.
So I didn't read specific draft for any of the senators' bills, but I do know that the pollution, not so much climate change, global warming and ozone layer increasing, decreasing. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about direct effect of the pollution that is going into the bay, the nitrates that are draining into the bay from local farmland. We have to make sure that type of pollution to the environment is stopped. And I'll be happy to read their bills. And I can't wait, in fact, to read their bills and to see the good stuff in it, and then, and see what we can feasibly do without, destroying farmland or fishermen or watermen.
So what do you do? I mean, you're an Eastern Shore resident, and I remember from back when I first was elected in the late '90s. God help me, I'm so old. But but they talked about farm runoff and chicken farm and Purdue, and so forth. Very challenging because there's this, always this tug of war between environment and economic development, and not putting people out of business. So what is it that we do about that? Like, what's the solution? Because that seems to be a problem that keeps on giving.
So that's a really good question. You have you have to always, it's as everything else in life, you have to find the balance. I'm sure that there are, with modern technology, that there are devices or fertilizers, if you will, that are not nitrate driven, not toxic. That even if you fertilize the farmland, so because we need chicken, we need food, restaurant business needs it, as everybody else, we can't just use the type of chemicals that is going to not only pollute the bay, but actually harm our health as well. And that is something that I'm very interested in learning more about, talking to those who are personally involved, as I have talked to farmers and watermen. And I actually went to their meetings at 5 a.m. And talked and listened to their issues, and the regulations and the burdens that on one hand prevents them to do their jobs, but on the other hand doesn't do anything for the environment. So we just have to be very careful, very smart about that, and I'm very interested in learning more.
Last question on the environment, then we'll move on, try to get through a whole bunch today. One of the more controversial issues, I guess some years ago, and actually Governor Hogan, and just to be fair, like I was on pretty hard on one side of this issue, but I think it's an important issue that in the last decade, kind of Maryland stuck out as the first and only state to legislatively, in a bipartisan way, ban fracking in the state. And it was that kind of an issue where you had Deep Creek that was very concerned about the economics and the tourism and so forth, and then kind of the surrounding areas wanting to frack for and get the profits from the frack gas. Where do you fall on Maryland's kind of one of a kind in the nation ban on fracking?
So I am against government banning people earning their living. That's just
so
my.
For fracking.
I am for fracking, but in a controlled, responsible manner. So it's not, one size fits all, and it's not like, okay, we're just gonna shut everything and we're just gonna bike. I mean, I like biking. Bike trails on Can Island are awesome. However, it's not reasonable and it's not realistic. We do have to open our energy resources that we have to help our people at the pump, at the grocery store. A lot of those things are embedded in cost. And then we obviously know the Marylanders are number one upset about the increased price of milk, groceries, gas. Taking Biden's oil reserves and then trying to play with the oil reserves to lower the cost at the pump just temporarily until we go through the election is the worst thing anybody can ever do. Playing with people's lives, playing politics with people's lives. And I'm a lawyer, I'm not a politician, and I'm baffled with the behavior of some politicians. So yes, I do understand that all energy resources have to be exploited to the most reasonable effect to the environment. Cost-benefit analysis has to be done. Like how else can we function if we just shut everything down or open everything up? The pendulum goes to one extreme and then to the next extreme, and I'm against any of these extremes, to be honest.
Okay. Let's move on.
Okay.
The next question I have for you is about Governor Hogan. You brought him up a couple times. leaving office with the highest popularity of any governor, I think, ever in Maryland when they left office. And so I guess the question, let me just ask a legislative policy question, not a political question. I guess to what do you attribute legislatively his enduring popularity in the state of Maryland? Like, what is it that you think that he has done correctly to kind of keep his poll numbers as high as they've been for as long as they've been?
I think it's a mix, again, balance of his personality, approachability, likability. He's very sort of appears as a down-to-earth guy, like very easy to talk to, like one of us. But that's one reason. And then the second reason is some of the things he would veto the bills that the bills would be so extreme that even he couldn't digest them, so he would veto them, like the Kerwin Law, the educational Maryland blueprint. He vetoed that with a very valid reason. And on the other hand, he didn't veto some bills that he thought that would afford some kind of compromise. I'm sure he would have, vetoed way more, but he realized that he is in Maryland, that he might have political aspirations in the future, and that finding a compromise between two evils and making enemies on the other side would not be the smart thing to do. So what he managed to do is have a likable personality, down-to-earth sort of personality, and then getting along with Democrat legislatures who really had a particular issue over a particular bill. Like, for an example, Maryland, My Maryland song. That was the Senate bill number one. Like, the number one important thing for the state of Maryland is to repeal 1867 Maryland, My Maryland song. I mean, really? Seriously? Is that the number one issue for the state of Maryland, to repeal a song from 1867? He could have vetoed it, but he didn't. So it got repealed in the previous session. So one of those things.
I was there for that, to be fair.
Oh, really? Yeah.
To be fair, there's 3,000 bills every year.
There's thousands of bills. So, but that's an example of one of the things that, is it really that important? But he was able to actually balance his job and to achieve certain things. And so he's generally likable in the state of Maryland.
So in terms of his legislative achievements, though, because he had some very ambitious, I was there for a number of years when he was the governor, and had a number of pretty ambitious bills on a range of topics. Is there anything that, you and your running mate point to as things that you are particularly, I guess it kind of comes under the heading of what do you think are his greatest legislative achievements? Obviously, he's well liked as an individual.
Yeah.
But beyond that, in terms of legislative achievements that he proposed and kind of pushed through, anything that sticks out for you over his 8-year period of time?
I wasn't paying much of a issue the first 4 years. That wasn't on my radar. But I do remember him first thing when he got into office, which made me vote for him early on, was lowering the tolls on the Bay Bridge, because that directly impacts my bottom line. So from $1.50, the tolls went up to $6 during O'Malley's administration, and the general fund was basically depleted for the repairs and construction of Bay Bridge. So when Hogan won, Open Maryland for Business, I think that was a huge achievement. We were so proud of Governor Hogan doing that, and he lowered the tolls down from $6 down to $4 for non-commuters, and for those that are commuters, back to $3. From 1.5 to 3, okay, we could do it, but it's way better than 6. I think that Opening Maryland for Business is one of those desired slogans and ideas that I would really give Governor Hogan great credit for. Opening Maryland for Business. I remember traffic going on 50, passing my house to Ocean City. Finally, restaurants are doing opening for business. We had revenues pouring into our budget. Okay. Our state is a AAA rated state. I am licensed financial advisor as well as an attorney, and I do recommend Maryland bonds to investors. That is the safe place where you actually have AAA rated state with tax-free income, retirees like it. And so those are the things that he managed to keep, even in a world economy that wasn't so stable.
So one of his, I remember the toll, that was one of the first things he did when he came in. One of the biggest achievements, and lots of issues, we talked last time a lot about public safety type issues, but one of his bigger ones, in fact maybe his biggest I would argue, was his work on the Justice Reinvestment Act, which Maryland leads the country still in terms of what they did in a completely bipartisan way. Senator Huff and the governor and Delegate Valerio and now Judge Dumais and others really just worked for a long period of time, years, putting together what is essentially the largest criminal justice reform in the country. Makes what the feds did look like absolute nothing. So I guess that's a continuing issue down in Annapolis, and one that the executive branch is obviously deeply, deeply involved in on a yearly basis. Any thoughts about kind of what he did, where, I mean, it was a lot, as you know, and so I guess, what is it that they got right? What is it that they got wrong? Where do we move from here, where we are now, where Governor Hogan leaves off on the issue of criminal justice reform moving forward?
Great question. So criminal justice reform is an ongoing reform. It's not done, and there's so much more to do. Even with the reform bill that was drafted and the proposed itemized plan of action to be done, we still have catastrophic murder rate in Baltimore City. We still have a catastrophic opioid crisis in the whole state. So my focus working with Delegate Cox is to narrow down to that area that is taking human lives. I mean, we're just not getting past that crime rate spiking high in Baltimore City. MS-13 rates in PG County is just going through the roof. So we can't have, happy citizenry with the death rate and murder rate in Baltimore City as it is right now.
So everybody kind of knows that, right? I mean, so what do you, like, I remember when I was chair of JPR, like, we had a multi-day hearing on, I mean, this has been an enduring problem. So I guess from a specific standpoint, specifically, what laws need, because the job of, if you were to win this thing, it's about creating laws, putting budgetary items and so forth. What is it you do about it?
So it's not that I am creating laws, it's the legislature that's creating laws, but what I need to do is once they submit the bill, let's narrow and focus in, and say, for an example, it's just an example, making plea deals. There's the time and the place for plea deals, and lawyers watching us know that. You just can't have a plea deals with everybody and not prosecute those who need to go before the jury. We just simply can't continue with the plea deals.
But what does the governor, lieutenant governor have to do with that? I mean, that's the purview of the state's attorney.
So you started with me making a law. I just said we're not going to be making laws. I want to see the laws that are made by the legislature. Once they come to me, I will be able to read it and to give my suggestions to carve out the crime. But for an example, executive has to give police officers support, latitude. And one of the issues that I started talking to you last time was vaccine mandates and record retirement rate of the police officers in the city. We just can't have everybody retire. We just can't survive policing of the violent criminals with 300 police officers in the city as opposed to 3,000. So we have to actually open our police force to hiring, training, and actually going after the most violent criminals. And I really need to know, because this is my first time here in politics, but I really don't know where is the issue. Why can't we arrest criminals that are actually violent criminals and take them through the jury process and follow the due process and follow the law and the facts where it takes us? So I would really be interested from the legislative perspective, what is the legislature going to give me? And I would like to work with them to focus on the unresolved, like you said, unresolved criminal justice issue in our state. I'm sure we can figure this out once we get elected.
So Governor Hogan for years proposed and got through most of kind of his proposal, which were to, in addition to justice reinvestment and so forth, to go after repeat violent offenders. So essentially to the executive branch was proposing bills that get put in through the General Assembly, and his was, at least one of them, was to, increase the amount of time for jail, potentially for recidivist, repeat violent offenders, and however you define that. Also putting in for 8507 beds and things of that nature for drug treatment and so forth. Is there anything beyond that the Cox-Schifanelli ticket is proposing to the General Assembly to do?
Very good notice, because I worked with Maryland State as an appointed attorney at Rao Boulevard right after law school for a while, about a year. And I was representing in Anne Arundel County those who have been arrested for the issue in the drug court program, actually, that was proposed by a former judge. He retired. A judge in Anne Arundel County actually was really, really, really well administered. So I would meet clients who were going, 5, 6, 7 years clean without committing a crime, and staying clean meaning of drugs. Right. Drug court and drug rehab program is a very good model to try to expand to every other jurisdiction in the state of Maryland. And people felt so proud where they can go 5, 6, 7 years clean without using any drugs. And when they relapse, I would talk to them and I said, why'd you do that? I don't know, the girlfriend left me. So there are programs and mental health parts of that part, at least criminal justice, that needs to be addressed ASAP. Okay. Mental health in conjunction with the drug court, supervisory role.
Separate
together.
Mental health and drug courts, or mental health courts and drug courts?
No, mental health and drug court working hand in glove in helping people who were arrested for theft only because they wanted to steal the DVD recorder or whatever and then sell it to get $20 worth of drugs. So the theft was associated, the robberies were associated for the need to, get property to sell so that they can buy drugs. It's the addiction that is driving a lot of these crimes, at least that I've seen for a year working as an appointed attorney for Maryland. So they need mental health treatments. And it's not something that can be done, in a week or 2 weeks or so. It's an ongoing mental health treatment. So the probation period, for example, could be extended, keeping an eye on those who are trying to snap out from the addiction process and committing a crime as a result. Okay. That should be completely separate from, like murder.
Right.
So those are things that I would really like to continue on expanding and promoting and helping those people seek cure. They're sick. Yeah.
One of the areas that a former lieutenant governor was deeply involved in was the issue of juvenile justice. And in a former life, I was the chair of the House Juvenile Law Subcommittee a long time ago, although you just talked about DVDs, so you may have dated yourself on that one. I guess my question is, this is a large topic and one that's often not talked about. I guess my question is, I'm going to leave it as a little open-ended. In the area of juvenile justice, specifically for the kids, we have commitment facilities and detention facilities and wraparound services, and there's a lot. Just kind of a couple-minute answer on areas, if any, that you'd focus on in the area of juvenile law and juvenile kind of the juvenile services system.
That is so near and dear to my heart. You have no idea. Bullying in schools, those kids who should have never gone through become juveniles, but they do. And it's closely tied to our education system. That's why it's so dear and close to my heart. There's so many of these, children who could be saved, but we as a society fail to take into consideration what's going on with them. So I have 3 boys, and I can tell you that they don't behave in a manner that the girls would in school, public school. So they were restless, they were throwing, things around and messing around. That doesn't mean that they are suffering from ADD or ADHD. And that doesn't mean that they need to be subjected to medication through wazoo. What I'm talking about, learning from the child and in conjunction with their parents and their guardians, right away in elementary school, what's causing them to act in a particular way? Is it the attention that they need, that they seek, but nobody cares about them? Is it something that's happening in their homes? Because if we don't take care of those that are like first, second, third grade, like right there in elementary school, and we let them fall through the cracks, and then they think that the behavior that they're exhibiting early on is valid, appropriate, then they grow up to come to high school or middle school while in teenage years that they believe that no one cares. And I talk to those kids and they said, why do I care? So I would ask, like, what about your grades? Why do I care? What do you mean, why do you care? They don't have vision of beautiful future ahead of them. It's dark, and we need to talk to them before they get into the juvenile system. So
let me stop you there for one second. I guess my question is, when they are in the juvenile system,
what? Okay.
When they are in the detention facilities, when you have kids that are in the committed facilities, and I think there are some, at least one or two that I recall from the Eastern Shore.
Oh, yeah.
Obviously in Western Maryland, you have the camps.
Oh, yeah.
Hickey, Cheltenham, the Baltimore City Detention Facility, the Juvenile Justice Center. What is it, if anything, do you think needs to change within the system itself? Because obviously that's budget, that's within the purview.
Mental health.
And what does
Mental
that mean?
health. That mental health, we need people, professionals that have experience in juvenile mental health treatment, to talk to them, to get them to step out. So when they do get out, they don't have the criminal history, they do get straight, footing with opportunities for jobs, opportunities to go learn a trade, promoting trade programs for those that are giving them a future, bright future, that there is something after they get out of their maximum 3-year commitment.
And you don't think that's going on right now, or you don't think it's going on to a greater extent?
Yes. So I don't think it's going on to the greater extent.
Okay.
I think it needs to be 100% more focused on solving and saving those kids, because there is hope for them.
Okay. Moving on to another topic.
Okay.
This is a broad topic, and it's very multifaceted. There's, as part of the election, as you know, and there's all the people running for office, but there are also questions. And one of them would put Maryland, along with some other number of states, to legalize marijuana. I'll ask you about that. That's kind of one area in that larger issue. Maryland, and every state is dealing with 3 different areas of cannabis. There's medical, there's decriminalization, and then there's legalization, which are all separate tracks. So I guess my question to you is, first let's start with the medical cannabis, because that has been legal for some time. How do you think Maryland is doing? Do you think that our medical cannabis system needs any changes to it? And we'll start there before we get into the kind of the...
Yeah, I think that people don't distinguish between the 3. So back to education. People don't know the difference. I think educating people, and also that medical grade marijuana and medical cannabis oil that comes out of it, it may save a lot of people, as not just using the chemistry to treat, but also natural remedies. This is part of the natural remedy. But people don't understand the benefits. They think that you're getting stoned. They don't understand the difference of the 3 that you just mentioned. I think, again, I have nothing against helping people save lives, numb pain, help them recover. Nothing wrong with it.
Any changes in the it's a complex, this is a very
I think medical professionals
it's a very
need
complicated
to, I think, no, you're fine, because medical professionals need to explain to individuals and educate their clients about the benefits and why would they supplement traditional, chemistry-based medicine with natural remedies. And you know what? Like, back to the where I come from. In Serbia, in Yugoslavia, there is an institute for the research of herbs. So when you go back to Belgrade, there is a pharmacy that only sells plant-based oils, dry type of tea, remedies that actually do help without traditional, or in conjunction with the traditional medicine. So I'm all for it.
Okay. So now I'm going to ask you the yes/no question, which you're not going to want to answer as a yes/no necessarily, but I'm going to ask it that way anyway.
That's a change.
Are you voting for, well, it's a for or against.
Or against.
Are you voting for or against the legalization of marijuana in this coming election?
Geez, see, it's not separated in these three ways. I'm all for liberty. I don't think that the government has to control what you put in your body, so I'm fine with it.
You're voting for it. Okay, well, there you go. Simple answer.
All right.
All right, let's move on. Economic development. We touched on it when we were talking about environmental protection, but I want to ask kind of a more specific question. A lot of MSBA members represent small businesses or are small businesses themselves. And so specifically, what is it that Maryland should be doing in the next 8 years? Not kind of, everybody believes that small businesses are the backbone and so forth. I want to know specifically, like, what is it, if anything, beyond what Governor Hogan and the General Assembly has done over the last 8 years, what's the next step in helping small businesses, and what is it that your priorities are specifically?
Tax, lowering taxes wherever you can, lowering fees, lowering administrative burdens. If we can lower taxes, I was just going through my own tax returns, and so one of the shocking things is that. As a small business, both my husband and I practice law, and we have our law office. And so he's a lawyer, I'm a lawyer, and we do our AGI, Schedule C. Little did I even put together that 15% of my AGI is self-employment tax. That does not include your, mortgages and deductions, whatever else you do on your 1040, on your personal income tax. It's the business. So with 15% flat off of your AGI, it's a lot of money that you have to actually pay to the government as a result of the fact that you are self-employed. So that alone needs to be part of some kind of calculation for the small businesses to be able to cover their expenses and their livelihood, like children's expenses if they have families, or so it's a lot of tax and but Maryland is one of the highest tax states. Number one. Number two, and I believe Dan Cox had talked about it through Wazoo. We are so taxed for a corporate income tax rate. For an example, Maryland is at 8.6%. Delaware is at 5.5%. Virginia is at 6%. Why do we have to be so expensive?
Delaware has a personal property tax, of course.
Well, so don't
we? They raise it up. No, they raise it up. But they raise it up. Everybody has their own thing. Somebody doesn't have a sales tax, but Delaware doesn't have sales. But they raise it in other ways. But
they do. The problem is all businesses get incorporated in Delaware. It is the haven for corporate businesses. If we want to have businesses thrive in Maryland, not just one-person lawyer business, but smaller businesses with 15 to 50 employees, we have to view them as essential part of our economy. Our manufacturing overall is 4% as a state, 4%. That's it.
So let's drill down then. So, what tax, which tax specifically would be, obviously you can't just lower all the taxes down.
I would like to lower the corporate tax rate. Obviously, I would like to give credits to Maryland's businesses 0 to 5 years on the expenses, like the startup expenses, the way the depreciation is calculated for them. For an example, buying a computer, you have to depreciate computer in the period of 5 years, as opposed to allowing that business to write off the expense right away as they purchase the equipment to work.
So what's the budgetary offset on that then? Because obviously in Maryland, unlike the federal government, which they can just run up deficits, we don't. We have a constitutional provision that mandates a balanced budget. And so with every tax revenue that you lower, you have to have an offsetting cut. So what's the cut?
So I think you're confusing offsetting and cut. By lowering taxes, the business will thrive, make more revenues, employ more people, which will then, in fact, pay more taxes.
So I understand that theory, but if that doesn't happen, so let's just go with a hypothetical, which I know nobody ever wants. Right. Everybody always says, well, waste and fraud. We're going to get rid of waste and fraud, and they never say what kind of the waste and fraud is. But waste and fraud, and it's just everything's going to magically work out. If it doesn't, when you have a tax, like somebody suggested lowering the sales tax by a penny. I think that was like 700 million or 800 million that comes off, and you can find offsetting cuts, but you need to do that within the budget. So I guess the question is, if what you're saying is not happen, what is the kind of where is the I don't know what the right word is, the fat in the budget that your administration would be willing to cut in order to lower that tax?
So that's a hypothetical that I have, from not being in the government, not seeing the expenditures that are there right now. I wouldn't be able to give you that concrete answer, but I can tell you what we have seen already. We have seen that we are one of the bottom states in manufacturing and small business. And Florida, that has 20 million people, is at the top. So there's obviously lessons to be learned. I'm for free market. I'm a free market proponent. I think the free market teaches us so many lessons that we often forget to learn. And I think that, like for an example, Schifanelli law had 8 attorneys. The minute Obamacare came in and mandated that we have to pay for everybody's health insurance, and once we overpay the penalties, what the business did was tell everybody goodbye. You can be on your own, because we can't afford to pay health insurance for 8 people. And yet, what was the purpose of that? So we do have lessons in a very recent history of what not to do. And that is, don't burden small businesses with burdens and expenditures and fees that they won't be able to pay. And what you're going to end up is having unemployment. And we have to pay attention to that as well.
Okay. I have 2 more quick issues, even though I'm getting the high sign. I have 2 quick ones that I want to go through, and they're not easy. But Maryland very recently has been put kind of in, there's an issue with statutory structure related to guns. And I don't want to talk in kind of the general,
guns,
I don't want to talk about the general
guns,
issue of guns. That's for another day. The specific Maryland issue is the Supreme Court, and as an attorney, I'm sure you're following this stuff. The Supreme Court wiped out the New York law in terms of their statutory structure on the concealed carry, which is similar, not identical, but similar to Maryland's. Maryland, had a fairly complex system, which looks like it's now unconstitutional based on what the Supreme Court did. And so this session, something's going to have to be done one way or the other on this thing, because the code seems to be unconstitutional.
Correct.
And so the question is, in 30 seconds or less, what is it that we do? What does the new law say for Maryland? What is your thought as to what the General Assembly should do on this issue? Because we're in
I
no
would
man's
follow
land.
Heller.
But Heller says what Heller said was the New York law was unconstitutional, and so what it may allow is anybody to get a concealed carry permit. Obviously, that's not something that's reasonable. You don't want individuals, for example, with murder convictions having a concealed carry permit. So where's the balance?
Well, you just said it. Convicted murderers don't get to have guns with them, especially knowing that recidivism rate is 70-some+%. But Heller is fantastic.
Anyone else besides, obviously there's murders, but there's thousands of crimes. There's mental health issues, which are not so easy to, obviously there are mental health issues which are not posing dangers to self or others. There are mental health issues that do. That is a complicated issue to try to figure out.
It's easy to solve. Bobby, it's really easy. The person applying for permit, the government has the burden, according to Heller, and it's in our Second Amendment, the government has the burden to prove that giving a gun to this person is going to be dangerous to public health and public safety, not the other way around. As a citizen of this country and this state, it's not you to have the burden to prove why you need it. It's the government who has the burden to prove why you shouldn't have it. So those are the structural, foundational issues that Heller gives us to work with, and it's perfectly fine. And Justice Scalia is one of those jurors that went such a deeply into why is the government the one, under strict scrutiny, to give the resident. Why does the government have the burden? Well, if you are saying what you're saying is true, which it is, you have a murderers, that's fine. So if I have been a convicted person, a murderer, and I'm out on parole, and I'm going to buy a gun, the government will tell me, well, Ms. Schifanelli, you can't get your gun because you just came out on parole for a murder. Sorry.
Let's just hypothetical. A 21-year-old who has no criminal conviction, no criminal convictions, maybe has some charges, but no criminal convictions, no known mental health issues, should that individual be permitted as of right in Maryland to carry a concealed weapon?
Yes, why not?
Okay. That's the question I wanted to ask.
If he's clean, normal person with no known, yeah, why
in
would he
grocery
not?
stores, wherever, so that somebody can have it on their porch. Because that's not the law right now in Maryland.
I
so-
know, and that is what the New York, and that's what the Supreme Court said is unconstitutional. We have Second Amendment for a reason. It's a reasonable burden on the Constitutional Bill of Rights. One of those would be criminal conviction, violent offender, and so forth. But if the person is just a norm like you and I, why would you have to fight with the government over something that has been your constitutional right from the beginning?
All right, my last question before I really get the high sign over here has to do with civil justice. And that is something that you really only hear within the confines of the Maryland State Bar Association. It's an issue which is really large for a significant number of people who move in and out of the court system every single day. And so I guess some of the bigger ticket issues in Maryland are we are one of, I think, 3 states that continues to have contributory negligence. We have caps on non-economic damages that other states don't have. There have been lots of issues that have been brought up over the years, and we continue to have, the confines of our civil justice. I guess again in 30 seconds or less, civil justice, comparative contributory, catastrophic cap, those types of issues. Any thoughts about that as an attorney who's running for office?
I like comparative fault versus contributory negligence. I mean, that is something that's a remnant from the common law tradition. We still have contributory negligence. That means that if you are found to be at fault even 1%, you are not going to recover any damages in case you get hurt. As opposed to, let's see who contributed to your injury and how much. I mean, modified contributory fault would be something to even consider. I am barred in New Jersey, and New Jersey follows modified contributory fault, which is looking whether you contributed more than 50% to the liability. If you are the one who caused the accident to yourself, you may not recover. But if you are under 50%, then you're not the person who caused the harm that happened to you. I would like to see some improvement in that area. Also, when it comes to family law, I was just, when Shaoli called me to come to this interview, I had a 2-day trial in a family law matter. The family law matter that's been dragged for the past, I just don't even know, 2 years almost. And I feel the pain that those judges in our court system have to go through listening to these family issues and having the repeat families going through the system. I would like to see creative solutions when it comes to co-parenting. In other words, not everything is subject to litigation. There should be a way for people who are fighting over summer schedule, or the people fighting over, who picks up the child from the soccer field, to have these issues resolved in a collaborative manner.
So you're a domestic attorney. I'm going to give you a yes, no on this one for our final question, because I am interested in that. I've also done some domestic cases. No fault divorce in Maryland?
No fault divorce.
Okay. And with that, you will never get that question anywhere but the MSBA.
I know, you're right.
Let me just stop and say, once again, gone through a lot of issues, obviously so much more to talk about. Gordana Schifanelli, thank you so much for being here again with the Maryland State Bar Association. It's your second interview with us, and thank you for answering a litany of questions, and 2 more weeks left on the campaign, so the best of luck to you, and thank you for joining us today again.
Thank you so much for having me. You're the best. Thank you, guys.